Thank you very much. A couple of points arising from that. I saw my first Raspberry Pi about 2 years ago, and it was in the ownership of my father, who is 78 years old and a technical teacher and still teaching because he loves it. And he was like a child. He just was so happy playing with this thing, and there were so many applications. And he went back, there's that one little box, he went back to school with maybe about 60 different projects for the kids. And he said, and I'm 78, he says, these kids will have an infinity of ideas. So there's a lot of potential out there. And just in terms of the media too, I was asked recently to talk to a bunch of psychiatrists about dealing with the media. And they said, they're never interested in what we do. I said, well, who do you know? I mean, have you formed any relationships with MD in the media? Do you know who your local newsroom is? Have you spoken, Well, no, not really. We don't like to. It's like everything else. You have to talk to. And the vast majority of people, I mean, I can only really speak for the BBC, the vast majority of people that work in the areas that you would be interested in talking to probably don't have science degrees. But the best science programs I've ever done have been done by people who were storytellers first and foremost, not scientists. You've got to be able to tell a story. You've got to be able to get clearly, get the information across. It's not the fact that the media is not interested, it's the media is not bloody psychic. You do actually need to go and talk to folk about it. Our next speaker this afternoon is Gareth Williams, Chief Executive Officer for Skyscanner, and Gareth's going to give us a personal take on internet economy startups. Okay, Gareth.
Thanks. I think I prefer co-founder over Chief Executive Officer, but that's all good. And today, I guess it's a privilege to be able to speak with you all. I remember in the years following the desert, the wasteland of the dot-com crash of the turn of the century, working away down in Leith. Actually coming to the ScotSoft event and the meal in the evening was an opportunity to see that actually here in Scotland other people were thinking about internet economy businesses, and that's only increased over the years, and it's a wonderful thing to see. And I think it's a bit like with authors, someone pointed out, they don't compete with each other. And I think what allows us to have a subculture of startups is that we're not directly competing with each other in a geographical sense. So what I want to talk about is, I suppose, some of my journey, personal journey through the years of being involved with Skyscanner. And that's a journey that's been shared by a lot of people, not least my two co-founders and the people previously and currently at Skyscanner. But I suppose I'll talk from my perspective whilst recognizing that. And I think that startups are a subset of a new business. A new business can be many things, but a startup sets out to solve something in a way that most, in fact, potentially all other people don't think can be solved or solved that way. And I think of Catch-22, which probably many of you will have read in your teenage years, like myself, and he defines a Catch-22 as a problematic situation for which the only solution is denied by circumstance inherent in the problem, by a rule. And the classic example of that is the light switch, which when you need it, when it's pitch dark, you can't find it. And really, startups are about getting hold of one of those Catch-22s and saying, I've got a different take on things. And there's a guy, I forget his name, but he's got a book, it's a British guy, called Variations of Normal. And his brain is built to just continually see these Catch-22s and spark an idea, many of them ridiculous. You should look it up. He's got, for instance, solves the problem of that boiled egg that doesn't stand on the table by designing eggs with square bottoms, either through genetic engineering or just dissolving the bottom of the egg. And in solving those Catch-22s, you're looking at problems differently. And there's two elements to that. Part of that is kind of the way you're brought up and your natural talent. But that's not really seeing solutions to problems we're all pretty capable of. The difficult thing is persisting with the solution and your vision that that solution will work in the face of, at best, indifference and more usually ridicule. And I think that's at the core of doing things. And one of the best quotes or definitions I've come across, and I've attempted to lay out this quote that I think is a mastery of verbal concision and expression, and I've probably mangled it there, but it's to say that entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial problem solving in its wider sense may be defined as the pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. And I think in that happy moment when you start a new life, that's exactly what life itself is doing, and bootstrapping its way to existence. And that definition, pursuit of opportunity, is saying, I intend to do something, and without regard to current resources. If you're sitting in the pub and you had a conversation and you've decided that is the moment of conviction, your current assets are your life ahead of you and the half pint that's remaining next to you. And from that, you've got to step forward and create impact. And so I think entrepreneurship is absolutely not about great ideas. They're useful to have, but they're going around almost free. And you can find them everywhere you look. And for instance, after an internal presentation that we did at Skyscanner, I was sitting in and I was noticing at the end, putting away all the chairs and everything like that. And then, because I should perhaps have more in my personal life, I dreamt overnight and came up with this invention, which was a carbon fiber rod that splits into three at the bottom, depending on your weight, has a little adjuster, and splits into a fan at the top. And I don't know much about carbon fiber. I'm just presuming it's strong enough. And that would be great. It'd be like an umbrella stand, and you can use these things and use them as seats and go forward. But that is like the conversation in the pub. It's ephemeral and of very little value. And so I gave it sufficient significance to doodle out the idea and then just filed it away till it got used in a different way. And Sherry talked about angels and VCs, but that is not entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial problem solving, and I'm 99% certain that Sherry would agree with me on that. Entrepreneurship is solving catch-22s, and when you seek to get funding, you're doing an implicit pact which says, bear with me in faith because my plans will lead us there. And generally speaking, that catch-22, that people only want to invest in companies that are going to be successful and show themselves to be successful, is largely true, in the sense that if it cannot be done without this funding, what is this thing that's missing? Because all that funding is going to bring is cash. And of course, advice and the advice that comes with it, or the people you get to join in with your venture, is often some of the things that are missing. But at its core, funding buys you time, which may be necessary because we solved it our way by sharing 2 salaries amongst 3 people and having 1 person full-time. Everybody's circumstances are different. And sometimes it is that opportunity cost of the fact that your partner or your family actually does need to get fed that force you down that route, or the market will close out in terms of the opportunity. So in a way, I view funding as a form of cheating, and it can be a very good form of cheating, but is not at its essence entrepreneurial. And I think the other thing that I had to come to terms with over time is, which again I sort of put in a doodle, and it's perhaps zoomed up a bit there, is you've got to have a sense of truthiness, because whatever you believe, it will be tested, and many of your beliefs are going to never be tested if you hold them in private or they're about fashion or something like that. And I kind of think of it in kind of three sections, and there are far more people in the lower section than in the middle section, and there's virtually no one in the top section. And at the bottom section, it's kind of like a truth dodger. It's someone, you know, if I go to the bus stop and the bus is 10 minutes late, I'll start thinking that Lothian buses have got it in for me. They've got a department of people that are trying to make my life difficult. It's very hard to function at the very bottom end of the scale. But even at the top of the scale, I think that's where, of the bottom third, that's where a lot of people live, which is, if I can come up with an explanation for the facts that I look at, and I can do so by blaming others, then that's what I'll do every single time. And that's a good way to get through your allotted time on this earth, but it's not a good way to have impact. And then in the happy zone, perhaps, in the green zone there, at the very top of it, you've got the truth pragmatist. And that's someone who essentially says, if I can do something about this truth, then I will examine what I need to do to change or to learn or to work with people and make something happen. You'll have to find someone who's in the top third. I don't know what they are. The only glimpse I've had of it. So that in the top third, you're seeing truth, even though you can do nothing about it. The only glimpse I've had is going into the office, being in office blocks or hotels, and going into the loo, doing whatever, and then thinking, there's 10 floors above me. And that's the sort of truth you don't need to know about what's happening above you, below you. There's no point to it. But the truth pragmatist picks examples that can result in some effect. So really, it seems to chime with some things said earlier today. Startup, bringing something to life from protean beginnings. And that is all about bootstrapping, which those that are at least partially technical will recognize the principles behind. And I think the good thing that comes from it, and it brings it back to the fact that more and more it becomes a shared endeavor, is from that conversation with a friend in the pub, you start doing things, you perhaps shift your perspective, and then you start being involved with other people and modifying your mission. And then through this giant chain of events, you start having impact in what you do in collaboration with other people. And I think at its core, that's why we get involved in startups. At board meetings, the fungible discussion, the thing everybody can agree on is shareholder value. But that's not the thing driving people in working, going to work. It becomes a common currency, literally. And I suppose, having looked at that, and in our beginnings down in Leith, having seen Instagram sort of shoot up to the stars and many others like that, had a kind of conclusion about how to look at whether an internet economy idea could have some success. And I think it's even more critical to consider this when we're outside of Silicon Valley because of the lower ratios of funding to risk, etc. And is your idea going to work? So one of the ways that I look at that is I say, imagine if you've got someone approaching you and they're a friend of yours and you've got a little bit of money and time, and they say, Gareth, get involved in myfuneral.com, because my key insight is this: everyone is a potential customer. And that is very true. 100% of the internet audience are a potential user of your service. It is but once a lifetime. And the trouble with that is that if you put engineering effort and product insight into removing one click from the checkout process, not the literal checkout process, but you are not going to get repayment of that effort. You actually have to put 100% of your resources into marketing and add specifically into advertising, because that is the challenge that you've chosen to enter and to be good at. Your challenge there is not about true internet economy dynamics. And the other example at the other extreme is that same person comes to me and says, I want to write this app, and it's called myheartbeat.com. And that's ridiculous. You think, how many people in this world are so egotistical, other than perhaps myself, in wanting to kind of look at every single one of their heartbeats? And you can imagine sort of you get a trace and people go, oh, come check out that heartbeat. It was a particularly special one. And so people would think that's crazy. But it's 60 times every minute. And there might not be many people that want to monitor their heartbeat 60 times a minute. But if they can find a way to make that interesting to people, then that is an idea that can scale. And if you're going to be opening it up several times a day, it really matters about the quality you're thought about. Can you reduce the number of clicks needed to use this service? And so I'd far rather invest or participate in the ridiculous idea of myheartbeat.com than myfuneral.com. And when I started thinking about this, I took, and this was a couple of years ago, I took a bunch of companies that were in, I think it was Business Insider Top 100, and I started plotting them against universality, against frequency. And so we've got yearly usage down to daily and even hourly, etc. And then we've got what proportion of the internet audience might want this service. And I thought, right, Google and Facebook, they're definitely top right. Pretty much everyone, and it's possibly a bit extreme, but pretty much everyone searches. And if you search, you tend to search most days that you're on the internet. And many, many people, multiple times a day. And so they're top right. And then I went, after having gone through that thought process, bugger, Skyscanner is on the left-hand side here. And then it hit me. Someone might have used Skyscanner and said, fantastic service. I'm definitely coming back next year when I go on holiday. And I don't want to be in the space where all available resources must go into advertising. I don't have enough of those skills. I want to be in the space where all of our resources go into making the product a better experience. So our job as a company is to get to the right, and it can be done. LinkedIn is one of the great examples of that. Sherry talked about people with skills and people who need skills. Well, at its core, people change jobs, whatever it is, every 2-5 years. They should have terrible frequency characteristics. So actually, if you look at LinkedIn, how did they change? How did they give value to people more frequently than the number of times that you change a job? Amazon is another example. Selling books, reasonably frequent, but not particularly. So these characteristics can be changed. So my advice, I suppose my summary is, if someone comes to you and says, invest in my internet economy company or come join it, and its name is usedferrari.com, it fails on both scores. It's bottom left there. And the interesting thing is, the more that you get to the top right, the more you better be a great technology company. Because in the very extreme top right, those companies, those behemoths of companies can disappear like that if they're not ahead of the game, as you see with MySpace and Facebook overcoming, with Yahoo versus Google, etc. But it's the space where you can grow very quickly as well. And so, bring it back perhaps to Scotland, and if we look at the physical connections between countries and here in the seas, you can see the internet is global. It's very clearly global, except the consumption of the internet and the internet economy and internet services is global. In actual fact, the production of internet services is overwhelmingly, is over-indexed highly in Silicon Valley. And the reason for that is in many ways no more greater thing than fashion. This trend started in '92 in California. It appeared on our shores in what, I don't know exactly. I've burned the image from my mind. I'm not going to turn around. Towards the end of the noughties would be my guess. Now, that doesn't matter for a fashion, but it matters for building software. And the biggest thing that we can do, or the biggest thing we can conclude, is in that red dot there, and increasingly in parts of China, on the east coast of China, there is an expectation of building world-class software at a world-class pace at scale. And all the knowledge is out there, just as the pictures of that trend were out there in the early 90s. And elsewhere, quality of execution in building and deploying and using software, particularly in the internet economy, tends to be the exception. And what that means is, in your own efforts, you have to be prepared to be a geographical tall poppy. And the good news is that by doing so, you will raise, or you will reduce the delta between the leading edge and where we are right now, geographically. And I think the challenge is really about being on the early adopter side and being prepared, because you can have that idea, but to actually follow through with it is difficult, because by definition, other people are just getting their hands around Agile and Scrum, and few people doing mobile first. But what about microservice architectures, for instance? Companies are starting to do that and accelerate away. And they'll be the companies that can bring down the Googles and others. Well, no one can bring down Google, clearly. And so, coming back to the Skyscanner story, I suppose with that person coming back a couple times a year, we've kept going. And gradually, and now, at the end of last year, we're up at 30 million people using our service each year. And with steadily growth. And I'm waiting for that frequency-induced product market fit so that we can really grow. And we're working as a team on that right now. And we've got some really exciting plans on that side. And I had a go at looking at the Times Tech Track, top 100 technology companies in the UK. And we're never at the top. We're never sort of, it's our inbuilt modesty, never at the top. But we're one of only 2 companies that have been in it for the last 5 years. I think the other one, Academia Limited. And most appear for a single year. And really, the only comparison that matters is against the leading edge. And the overused term, Grant now, is the Unicorn Club. And if we look at the companies in there, the definition being getting to $1 billion, sorry, Sherry, of enterprise value within 10 years. Well, it's a different equation. Myself and my 2 co-founders, we were only full-time at 2005, but we did start before that. But the interesting thing is that you get a chance to do something differently outside of Vue. Not one of those companies has had less than $100 million invested, and most of them several $100 million. And during the lifetime of Skyscanner, we've had $6 million invested. So I think what I want to kind of conclude with is that irrespective that it's me and my colleagues, we have data points that in Scotland we can produce billion-dollar internet economy companies. And actually the challenge to some of those people, some of you out there, is that you can leverage that in lots of different ways and aim to achieve impact in what you do at a global scale. And you'll notice that there's a final doodle on that screen. It's a personal catch-22 I attempt to solve myself, of getting from rubbish drawer to being able to put something up on my wall. And I use 10,000 hours of meeting time to continually do drawings because it doesn't interfere with thinking, or that's what I tell myself. So I hope that was of some interest, that you're able to take something away from that, and thank you for listening.